Surviving the Survivor, we bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to Surviving the Survivor. It is the show that brings you the very best guests in all of true crime on trending criminal cases. This is a trial that is making global headlines, and I can tell you that firsthand because I've seen some of them, but I was also inside the courtroom all last week in downtown Manhattan at federal court. I was sitting next to people from the BBC, the Times of India, you name it, the London Times. They were all there, and they are covering this because it has worldwide appeal. It is day 6, or it was, I should say, today, of testimony in the Sean Diddy Combs trial. And you are looking on the right side there at Cassie Ventura's best friend and Dawn Richard on the left, both who testified today in this trial that has become a media frenzy. Again, the blonde is former best friend Kerry Morgan, Dawn Richard on the left. And then to wind up the day, we had Sean Combs' ex-personal assistant from like 2008, 2009, roughly, a male assistant, and he broke down crying more than once on the stand. So here to break it all down and what this all means. By the way, there was a harrowing line today from Dawn Richard recalling the time that Sean Combs said to her and Cassie Ventura, and I quote, "You could go missing." This was now Dawn recalling this. So she says, "You could go missing, that we could die. You could go missing, that we could die." So some heavy testimony yet again. And last week, I have to tell you, on top of being back in New York for the first time in a while, which is exhausting in and of itself, just being in Manhattan without anything else is tiring, let alone listening to some really difficult testimony. So quite a draining week, but important testimony nonetheless. We welcome in our best guests, and I'm happy to welcome her for the first time, Berit Berger. She serves now as the Executive Assistant DA, District Attorney for Policy and Strategic Initiatives, and Chief Ethics Officer for the Westchester County District Attorney's Office. She most recently led the Center for Advancement of Public Integrity at Columbia Law School as Executive Director. And for the purposes of this story, from 2007, I believe, to 2018, Berit served as a federal prosecutor in the United States Attorney's Office for both the Eastern and Southern districts of New York, where all of this is going down. Joining us shortly is Lisa Aronson Fontes. She's been on the show a few times already. She literally wrote the book on coercive control. She will be here shortly. And last but certainly, oh, there she is. She's here right now, Dr. Lisa Fontes. And last but not least, we've got Anna Cominsky. She's the director of the Criminal Defense Clinic at New York Law School. She teaches 3 other classes there. She's also the in-house attorney. So 2 very bright attorneys, one formerly of the SDNY, and then we've got a literal world-renowned expert in the area of coercive control. So, Berit, without further ado, I'm going to start with you. You were in this office, and I got to tell you, when I was in court all last week, and I've started, I think, every show with this, every single person is asking every other single person, yeah, I get it. There's definitely a DV element here. We don't say the words on YouTube, but a DV element and the R word that rhymes with grape. So there's definitely that going on, but people are kind of scratching their heads, wondering, but are there RICO charges that actually, the RICO charges, did this actually happen? The sex trafficking. So just to recount, there's 1 count of racketeering conspiracy, 2 counts of sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. Of course, Sean Combs, we have to tell you, has pleaded not guilty. So let's just, Berit, if you can just break down the RICO versus the sex trafficking count, and then I'll have Professor Anna Cominsky weigh in as well. Is the government, in your opinion, on their way to proving this, and what are they proving here?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And honestly, it's one that my former prosecutor friends and I have been talking about as well. So in recent years, we've seen a real expansion of how this RICO statute is being used. Obviously, when RICO was first enacted, people were using it to prosecute the mob. And that's how I thought of RICO, is for organized crime. In recent years, prosecutors have been applying and using this RICO statute for a host of other crimes because it's such a powerful statute, and it's a really amazing tool for prosecutors to have in their tool belt, and allows them to get into evidence a lot of things that they otherwise wouldn't be able to do. So when I was a federal prosecutor, I prosecuted RICO crimes a lot, some for organized crime, as the traditional notion, some for gang cases. So a lot of cases I took to trial that were, just traditional gang, nothing organized about them. We used it for some terrorism cases and then sex trafficking cases. And this is sort of the newer frontier of how RICO is being used. And we've seen it used very effectively within the last few years in cases, R. Kelly, we now see it in the Sean Combs case. Oh, my dog has entered the chat here.
We are, by the way, we are the most dog-friendly show you will ever see. I have Fred and Ethel, so feel free. What is your dog's name? Everyone's going to
My dog is Cora. She is a 90-pound Bernedoodle, so she's a big presence and likes to make herself known.
Cora, welcome to the show, and eventually you will show us that cute face. But go ahead. And by the way, Chewy, you should be sponsoring us. But go ahead.
Oh, 100%, and sending the discount code my way, please. She eats a lot.
Yeah.
So we've seen it used a lot in sex trafficking type cases. What's interesting to me is that, and we can talk about what they have to show for the RICO case, et cetera. I have no doubt that these prosecutors will be able, and probably already have, satisfied the legal elements of a RICO case. I think they will put forth a facially sufficient claim for RICO. The question that my friends and I keep talking about is, okay, even though you can charge this conduct as RICO, should you be charging this at RICO? Or is this really just overreach at this point? And the benefit, obviously, is that you can tie a whole host of otherwise unconnected acts together as being part of this enterprise. You can bring in things that otherwise would be time barred because of the statute of limitations. You can bring that in using the RICO statute. And it allows you to, even call witnesses you probably otherwise wouldn't be able to call. So it's a really effective and powerful tool. But this really does, and I think as people have noted, this case in particular, while you know that it's wrong and it's vile conduct, is it really a racketeering enterprise, or is this just one really horrible human being in a very abusive relationship? So that is a question that not only, pundits, but prosecutors over dinner we've been talking about as well.
Yeah, and just to stay on that, because it's important now, and then I'm going to come back and ask you about the derivation of your name, because I love it. But from Anita Bourbon, love this panel. It is the all-woman power panel today. Anna, minus me, of course, although some say otherwise, I don't know. Anna, to you, what about this? So, these are racketeering and RICO charges. Is this going to be a problem for these jurors to wrap their, obviously they're going to get directions again from Judge Subramanian, who I think is doing a fantastic job as they get to deliberations eventually, 7 weeks away. But was this case, in your opinion, charged properly?
Well, I agree with Berit. I too have been discussing it with people, as I know so many people have been doing, and it's a strange case, although I know that the prosecutor's offices have expanded the way that they're using RICO. I actually also was planning on referring to the R. Kelly case. That's another example where they sort of expanded how we typically think of RICO. Just because we've expanded it doesn't mean that it should be done this way. And I really think in terms of the prosecutor's case, where they're going to have the hardest where they're going to have the hardest time proving this RICO case, and where I think the defense can really hammer it home, is with respect to the idea of this criminal enterprise, right? It is not a crime to have people work for you. It is not a crime to be a powerful person. It's not a crime to be a famous entertainer, right? None of these things are criminal. And even to have people at your beck and call to do things for you, none of those things are crimes. So it can't just be that the allegations about Combs are true. It also has to be that this was part of a greater criminal enterprise. And, we can sort of see there's been a little bit of testimony about that yet, but we really need to see a lot more in order for the jurors to connect the dots there. Of course, I will say that, as you mentioned, the jury instructions, one thing we know about jury instructions, they're awful. They're very confusing. Jurors are always confused by them. And so this is really going to be dependent on what the defense does in its summation, what the prosecutors do in their summation to help tie this together for the jurors.
Yeah. And Dr. Fontes, I promise again, I'm coming to you, but since we're discussing these charges, I kind of want to flesh it out real quickly. I'm writing the word guilt down because I have a question related to that. But you see this question, Berit, how is it possible for a one-man RICO? And you heard about R. Kelly, but also today we hear testimony that all the bodyguards were, I guess, carrying legal firearms, they said, but they're carrying them, in their waistband or in a holster on their back. And it was obviously used at some points for intimidation purposes. And I think we heard testimony even about the head of security carrying a switchblade, which is also, that's like 1970s New York stuff going on there. But so just back to this question here, the one-man RICO and what Anna just said, which is this whole racketeering notion and the issue of running a criminal enterprise. How do you connect those dots?
Yeah, I mean, it's not unheard of to have a limited enterprise. Again, we think of an enterprise and we think of, a corporation. And by the way, a corporation can be an enterprise for purposes of the statute. You can have a perfectly legal enterprise that is also an enterprise for purposes of RICO. When I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, I charged two brothers, the Mays brothers, with running an enterprise. And, it was two of them. There's nothing magical about the number or how you even define the enterprise. I mean, honestly, it is in some ways just a prosecutor's fiction to name these enterprises, because the criminals certainly did not name their enterprise for the most part, right? This is, we come up with something because you have to charge it as something in the indictment. But they're, in my case, the criminals didn't call themselves the Mays Brothers Enterprise. That was our name for it, just to refer to it. I'm sure, Sean Combs, while he had many different businesses, it wasn't the Combs Enterprise that they referred to it. Each enterprise had its own name. So there's no magic to how many people are involved. What the prosecutors are going to need to show, though, is that this is not just one person's criminal activity on behalf of himself. The RICO activity, and we have to show a pattern of that, but each of the acts, they have to be in furtherance of the enterprise. You have to connect them back to this enterprise. So while Combs can be the one leading the drive here, he can be sort of the centerpiece of this enterprise, as long as they can bring in, and that's what you're starting to see today in testimony, about other people working, for Combs at his direction. Honestly, even testimony that we heard from Cassie Ventura, she was a part of this enterprise, even though she was certainly victimized by it. She was a member of this enterprise as well. So I think, that's how you can sort of think about it as, people coming in and doing things on behalf of it. But I wouldn't get hung up on, how it's defined or how many people are a part of it.
Yeah, when we hear the word enterprise, you're thinking of maybe like General Electric or Microsoft and, big companies running enterprises, but this is not what we're necessarily talking about from a legal definition or legal standpoint. So this story is always a little tricky because we have a lot of daily testimony, which I want to sprinkle in, and then I'm going to come to Dr. Fontes. So 8 a.m. this morning, Danity Kane, she is the first witness continuing from Friday. She is the singer Dawn Richard from the band Danity Kane. Arrives at court 8:58, 9 o'clock. 6th day of testimony starts. She is dressed there in a white shirt and an overcoat in the courtroom. And then the direct testimony starts, and this is where she tells the government, the person questioning her, that you could go missing, that we could die. That those are words that Sean Combs used toward her and Cassie Ventura. And she went on to say, Dr. Fontes, that she frequently saw Sean Combs punch, choke, slap, and kick Cassie when she voiced opinions. And that is important to me. I mean, Dr. Fontes, it seemed from her testimony that she would pay for it if she spoke up. Seems awfully misogynistic and, frankly, just disgusting. And I'm talking to a panel of super intelligent women. But is this par for the course here with coercive control? You have a woman that you're trying to control, and now she's got an opinion. Do these perpetrators across the board, is that when they shut down these women generally?
Well, coercive control can look many ways. Sometimes there's physical violence. Sometimes there's no physical violence at all. And someone is controlled by isolation, degradation, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, financial abuse, and so on. But this case was marked not only by isolation and drugging to weaken her and the sexual abuse, but also very extreme physical abuse. And when you think about what you just said, that she was kicked, punched, and strangled, I think you said, use the word choked, I'll use the word strangled, for having an opinion. I mean, that's pretty extreme. It appears that the allegations suggest, and the videotape that we all saw of her getting beaten, of Mr. Combs beating her, show that he didn't consider her human. She was some kind of rag doll. She was a thing to use sexually. And not just her. There were other women who apparently were drugged, were forced to have sex with these male prostitutes, and who also, we've heard from at least one testifying. So, and I maybe we'll hear from more. So I'm sort of curious. I was wondering if that, I'm not an attorney, I'm wondering if that's part of what makes this an enterprise, the number of women who are being victimized, the use of prostitutes, of male prostitutes, doing these group sex torture sessions really all over the world. And all of the people who must have known in these hotels, Mr. Combs's staff, people supplying equipment. Is that part of what makes it an enterprise? I don't know.
Yeah, Berit, you want to field that question, Berit?
Yeah, I mean, so what makes it an enterprise is that you have, these people working together, and they have to either be employed by or associated with the enterprise to do criminal activity, to do certain enumerated RICO crimes. So all that means is that you have somebody that, let's say, is in Combs's security staff, and he takes certain steps to make sure that some of these women victims either can't report this or don't have a choice to not do it again. Steps that they've taken, they are now part of the enterprise, right? If they are doing things on behalf and in furtherance of the enterprise, they can be part of this. Again, even if they weren't, didn't have a badge that said I'm part of the enterprise, they don't need to have a business card saying they have a formal association, but that can be enough. And what the prosecutors are looking for here, and I said the words before, I'll just come back to them, is they have to show a pattern of racketeering activity. That really is a very low bar. They have to show that Combs committed 2 racketeering acts in furtherance of this enterprise over a 10-year period. So it's almost, that's why I said, I have no doubt that they have, at least at this point, established this on a, very facial level. Convincing a jury that this is in fact racketeering activity is a harder burden. We can get into more detail about that, but they certainly have gotten over that threshold, at least in my mind.
Yeah, Berit. So I have to ask you, is Berit your God-given name, or is it a nickname? I love it.
Berit is my God-given name. It's a Norwegian name, very common in Norway. If you go over there, you'll meet a lot of Berits.
Yeah, well,
yes, they're taller and blonder than I am, but yes, they share my name.
I like the name nonetheless. So, Anna, to you, we tackled the RICO stuff already, but Sean Combs is also charged with sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. And when I was speaking to some very bright legal minds, they were telling me that you only have to actually prove either the force, fraud, or coercion, not necessarily all three. Is that true? And just elaborate on, I mean, what does sex trafficking mean? Because this, again, and you know, so the gallery was made up primarily of media who generally don't know a whole lot. And I'm part of that, or was officially, and also of just lay people. I think I mentioned earlier this morning, you know, like there was a MTA subway conductor who was in uniform going there every day to watch and then would go to work. So the sex trafficking, does that relate to Cassie and these other women who were, according to the government, forced into these sexual liaisons? I guess that's probably way too nice a word. Or some people are wondering, does this also have to do with the escort? So how are we to understand the sex trafficking charges?
Well, so to your first question, you are correct. And the people that you spoke with, it doesn't surprise me, others that you've had on the show are correct, that the government does not have to prove the force, fraud, and coercion. There's an or there, so they can prove it one of those ways or all of them. That's, you know, sort of part of the power that the prosecutor has in these cases is they have the charging decision. They decide what witnesses they want to call. They decide what charges they want to bring. And with respect to the sex trafficking, it appears on the face of the indictment that they are referring to these women who I'll refer to, I think as many of us would, as the alleged victims in this case with respect to the sex trafficking, although it's not totally clear to me, and it wouldn't surprise me if some of the male escorts or paid prostitutes were also put into that category. And the reason I say that is because we have heard some things, not testimony yet, but just based on some of the things we've heard about the case outside of the courtroom that suggests that some of these male escorts or prostitutes did not willingly participate in some of the things that they were asked to do, right? I think, you know, what may come off as not a popular opinion, but I think is very important to remember is that Combs, no matter what you think of him, no matter what he may have done here, just like all of us, enjoys the presumption of innocence. And the reason I raise that is because one of the things that I've noticed the defense team is starting to try and poke some holes in is how much of this was something that was consented to and how much of it was something that wasn't. Now, of course, stepping back as a woman, as a human, I have watched and read some of this and am appalled by the allegations. But from a legal standpoint, my opinion doesn't matter. What matters is what those jurors ultimately determine when they get the case. And so you'll notice as you look in particular at the cross-examination, when it comes to some of these allegations about the force surrounding some of these sexual acts, one of the things that you'll notice is when they insert some doubt with respect to whether these were consensual or not. And that's one of the things that I expect the defense to continue to do. That's why we noticed it with Cassie, where they went through all of the text messages that she sent. We saw it with Dawn Richards, today, when they, talk to her about coming back into the fold or trying to come back into the fold and work with Combs again, right? They're trying to show that this was by choice. And so that sort of plays into this whole idea of sex trafficking.
Yeah.
Can I ask something about that? Can I say something about that? Yeah. We saw Mr. Combs beating bloody Ms. Ventura once when she left one of these sex torture sessions. Right? He beat her bloody and sent her back in. So even if from time to time she did consent, I mean, I would question if that's true consent if you know you're going to get beaten. But let's say not absolutely everything was forced or coerced. Let's just imagine that. The fact that we know that there has been forced and coercion, isn't that all we need to know? Even if she volunteered at a time or two.
And assuming that, and Berit, I'll let you respond to this as well, but that's assuming that the jury believes her testimony with respect to the fact of what happened before that incident and what happened after it, right? So there's no doubt of that awful scene, that video that we've now seen. Okay, I don't think there's any doubt. I don't think there's any doubt in terms of what the jurors saw and what they're going to believe. But it's what happened before and what happened after, and then what happened on other occasions.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if I can jump in just for a minute, I mean, I think, Lisa, I think your point's exactly right? Like, you can consent on certain times. And my guess is they will easily prove that she did. You can both be involved in a relationship that you think is, loving and a good relationship, and then also at other times be victimized, right? And this, I think, is going to be really important for the prosecutors to show. And by the way, I'm sure you discussed this in your book, but this is how we now think about victimhood. I mean, social science has come so far into how we understand choice and what coercion actually is. I think this, some of the defense's arguments, I'm like, have we just turned the clock back 30 years? I mean, this idea that, oh, well, she's saying, I love you and I'm really excited to do this, so obviously that must be the case and she couldn't be victimized. This is just not how we now know these type of relationships work. It's not how abuse works. It's not how coercion works. And what we have seen as prosecutors and people that work with victims time and time again is people that are in this vicious cycle where sometimes it is, in their minds at least, a loving relationship, and sometimes it is, absolutely coercive and abusive. So to me, those things, and if I was the prosecutor, I would say none of this is mutually exclusive. She can both have said, yes, I'm looking forward to this freak off, and then also have been absolutely terrified and not wanting to do it. And if you can prove that there are at least 2 instances where she did not want to do that and she was, forced into this, you will have a pattern of racketeering. If you can prove even one of those, you will have sex trafficking. So to me, this is just, much more advancements in how we understand these cycles. And I imagine these are just incredibly experienced, talented prosecutors. They're going to make these arguments and they're going to make this clear to the jury.
Yeah, and
Berit, to your point, I'm so sorry. I was just going to say, to Berit's point, I'll be interested to see if the prosecutors call an expert to talk about the nature of abusive relationships.
They have one in mind. Yes. Dawn Hughes has been announced as the expert.
That's something I was anticipating and thought would happen. Berit, what I was going to ask you real quick, and then we'll continue the conversation. You always hear this at the end of every conversation, but just remember, the feds have a 98% conviction rate, and they've got an 8-week trial, and they don't lose cases. Is that? I mean, I know it's very, very high, but is that enough to? I guess if you want to see a conviction here, is that enough to maybe take comfort in, or do you have to always have your guard up, I guess?
I mean, I am the most superstitious person so I would never say something like that without knocking on every wooden surface nearby. Yeah. But look, they do have a very high success rate for a reason. And it's not because, the people just give the government the benefit of the doubt, particularly now. We have a different Department of Justice. People may not necessarily be willing to give this Department of Justice the benefit of the doubt. But the reason that they tend to have such a high success rate is because these are not reactive cases. These are cases that have been built over years. And that means that they have, been painstakingly gathering evidence. The agents that they work with have put together, as much corroboration. So they're not just calling Cassie and saying, yes, you should take her word for it. The same way that I would always tell jurors, if I'm calling a cooperating witness, I would never just put this witness in front of you and say, like, absolutely take his word for it. No, he's a criminal. What I would do is say, listen to that, but then look at everything else that we've brought into this case to corroborate his or her testimony. And that's what they're going to do. They are going to corroborate Cassie's testimony, both through, documents, extra witnesses, but also through other victims. You're going to hear patterns in how they all testify. And my guess is, this is, again, knocking on something. If they are successful, that is why, not because jurors love the government, but because they will have just dotted every I and crossed every T.
Yeah. Miss T here. Why are we not hearing about all the videos? Last year we heard all about Combs' video, all the freak offs or blackmail or something, billionaires. But there was discussion when I was in court last week without the jury present about what can they show, what can't they show. And I think that they're going to be showing some very sexually explicit, quote unquote, freak off video. Tony Hoban, welcome. She has become a YouTube member. We're meeting a lot of new people with this case, as we do when we dive into new cases. So welcome to everybody. We do updates daily on Diddy, and in the evening, we always do at least one, if not two, roundtable type discussion shows like you are witnessing right now. So please subscribe and hit the like button. COE, if you can. I know it's a lot, especially because the kiddos are home. For those who are new, the COE is the chief of everything, aka my wife, aka a former network news correspondent, and most importantly, the mother of our kids. But Gene Deal and Dr. Fontes, this is for you. And COE, there's a YouTube clip, which is what I was hoping maybe you can pull up. But so he's, I believe, like a former bodyguard for Sean Combs or an employee. I'm not 100% sure. But he has a very interesting kind of long soundbite on YouTube where he is a big, intimidating looking human being. And he is pondering kind of out in the distance, talking about Sean Combs. And he says that Sean Combs is a demon, that he has a demon inside of him, that he is literally like the devil. So it just made me think, we do always, as we should, talk about the victim. But when it comes to coercive control, is there a certain type of demonic person or a certain sort of set of attributes associated with the controller? Like, is there a common denominator there?
I love that question.
Thank you.
Because Sean Combs' level of alleged violence and the violence that we saw in the video is extreme. And I think it's easy to spot him as a victimizer, although we have to admit that more than a decade went when he was allegedly engaging in these behaviors, and he really did not face consequences. But another coercive controller could be your neighbor, could be your clergy member, could be your teacher, could be a politician. So people who are coercively controlling often keep up a very good front. They often are very intent on making good impression, and they will basically groom people in their community to consider them do-gooders, and will save the abuse for inside the home. They'll save the coercive control for their partner. So these kinds of two faces, and actually we heard Cassie Ventura talk about that last week, how Sean Combs was loving and kind in the beginning, but then his eyes would go black, I think she said, and he could be exceedingly cruel and treat her and other women in really an inhuman way. So having multiple faces and maybe a very kind face to the public is not unusual for coercive controllers. The bottom line is that they just want to control their partner and often their children. And they put their needs above anybody else's. They put their needs ahead of anybody else's. They don't have empathy. If they had empathy, they wouldn't be able to do the things that they can do. And I have worked on cases as an expert witness on legal cases that were like Sean Combs, but with less money. So it didn't involve flying all over the world, but where women were obligated to do things sexually that they didn't want to do, even with other people, even kind of these forced sex parties with drugs. It's not entirely unfamiliar to me. It's just that the scale of what is reported here is much greater. And maybe that's where we get to the enterprise, because there were so many people involved. And well, I know you said that wasn't required, but it was a bigger thing than somebody doing this in their living room, let's say. It was a much bigger thing.
Yeah.
But the intention to totally dominate a partner, dominate them sexually, belittle them, verbally abuse them so they feel badly about themselves. Today we heard testimony from one of Cassie's friends, Kerry Morgan, and she said that Cassie was a confident woman at 19 when she met Mr. Combs, and that she really changed over time and lost that sense of confidence.
Yeah, she sure did over time. I mean, he beat her down there's no doubt about that. Southern Charmed here. This is so interesting. I hope Diddy is taken down. He is a horrible man. Anna, to you on this one. So this I've been thinking about. Obviously, we talked already about jury instructions, but this jury, when it is the time, will be instructed by the judge about, following the facts of the case and the evidence, et cetera, et cetera. But I've seen a lot of comments that basically amount to he is a horrible human being and deserves everything he gets. Is there a chance in a case like this that the jury is just going to say, I don't even fully understand these instructions, but this guy is such a monster, I'm voting guilty?
Yes. That's always a risk. And it's a risk that the defense is aware of. And that's why they came out right in their opening by saying, you don't have to like him. In fact, you can really dislike him. You can hate him. You can find the things that he may have done in his bedroom or in his home disgusting, abhorrent, but the burden still lies with the prosecutor to prove these allegations beyond a reasonable doubt. And an abusive relationship on its own does not amount to racketeering, sex trafficking, etc. Right? So, but you're absolutely right. I would say both sides are always concerned with what we call jury nullification, where the jury uses their emotion and their gut to make a decision and not the facts and the law that were in front of them.
Yeah. Berit, back to you. So one of the things Dr. Fontes said on an earlier show, which I think is a great point, is everyone, and it's it's a headline grabbing term, the term freak offs, but you heard already Dr. Fontes use, I think she said like a torturous orgy or something along those lines. These were horrific, sexual, trysts that they were basically forced into, according to the government. Would it be effective for one of the government lawyers to come out and use something like that to their benefit, to say to either, I don't know, coercive control expert or someone else, Sean Combs calls these freak offs, but they aren't really, they're this, and this. Is that something that you would want to see happen in terms of line of questioning or an angle that the government would take in describing the acts here that are in question?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, they may draw objections if they try to categorize them with their own words. I think they're probably safer using the defendant's own terminology for that. But certainly when they're giving their closing argument, I mean, again, whatever they want to call it doesn't matter. What they're going to be discussing and focusing on is the conduct that happened during these sessions. You want to call it whatever you want to call it, great. That doesn't make it okay. And just to go back for a moment on this, defense, and I agree. I think the defense was limited in some ways as to what they could come out with, as far as, there's not so many great defenses to this conduct. And so in some ways, I understand why they came out with it's not racketeering, it's just domestic abuse. I gotta say though, he's not a racketeer, he's just a domestic abuser is not a great defense. Like jurors, and I've talked to a lot of jurors, jurors don't want to let bad people off. They just don't. Mm-hmm. They want to feel not only like they're following the law, but they want to feel like they are, serving justice. And sometimes that means that they want to hold the government accountable because the government hasn't proven their case, but they really don't like just letting somebody off the hook, not finding accountability on, and I'm going to use air quotes here, even though we're doing a podcast, on a technicality. So I do think that it's a tricky defense to concede domestic abuse, but not the racketeering or the sex trafficking. So they're walking a very razor thin line there. And at least in my experience, again, anything can happen, and trials are not always easy to predict, but that is a hard defense.
Yeah. Anna, one of the things that also keeps coming up is this witness number 3 that apparently is missing or went missing and can't be contacted. And I think a lot, someone's also asking about the misdemeanor. What happened to the civil lawyer? She's talking about Tony Busby, who had a bazillion, zillion. That's a lot. It's a big number. Civil lawsuits against Diddy. Well, he's still at it. And I think a lot of people maybe conflated the two. They thought that maybe the Tony Busby victims would be here and we'd see 50 victims. But really, it's only going to be 2 or 3. And witness number 3 is apparently missing in action. I'm wondering if you've heard anything about where this person is and how much, if at all, does it hurt the case. Some people speculate that maybe she's intimidated by Sean Combs, and so she sort of backed out of testifying. But how big or not a problem is this?
So it's going to be a problem for the prosecutor if they built their case around that particular victim. We know right now that, of course, their case is built, at least so far, around Cassie Ventura. I mean, it's very clear that she is the main victim, so to speak. And then it looks like there's sort of going to be, you know, rings that go outside of her, right? Ripple effects outside of that. And then people associated with other things outside of that. But they definitely, at least so far, have really hung their hat with respect to her. It depends what they did in their opening. If they opened and said, you will hear from victim 1, victim 2, and victim 3, and victim 3 does not appear, it's definitely going to be something that the defense points to. Now, what I will say is sort of to Berit's point, just because the defense can point to it, just because it may be something they can bring up, doesn't mean it's winnable. And one of the things that's really, really hard as a defense attorney is going up against the feds. The federal government is usually has more at their disposal. They started the case, so they've made charging decisions, and they've made smart charging decisions. And so, coming in, you are always on the defensive as the defense, for, lack of a better analogy. So, where this witness is, I do not know. But it'll be interesting to see whether anything comes of it or at all.
Yeah. Some great questions coming in, and keep them coming in, and we will try to get to them. I just want to, again, recount some of the testimony. That's why doing these shows are a little tricky. So the government is today tying, and in the past couple of days, Sean Combs' business empire from bad boys to revolt to this RICO conspiracy. Those are the racketeering charges that we talked about. We're heard testimony even today about NDAs. So, Dr. Fontes, to you, it kind of runs the gamut, which brings us to this question here from Survivor C. Can the doctor speak about coercive control also as neglect, stonewalling, and other dismissive acts, including, I don't think Cassie was, but Dawn Richard, and I think it was actually Kerry Morgan, the best friend. She was forced after being hit by Sean Combs. She gets $30,000 from a billionaire and is forced to sign an NDA. So what else, I guess the question is, does coercive control look like besides just, beating someone and pulling their hair?
Right. And we have to remember that even though a lot of things can make up coercive control, they don't all have to be present. So physical abuse, verbal abuse, which can go in many forms, gaslighting, degrading, frightening, intimidation, threats, weakening somebody physically could be through drugging, could be through not allowing them to sleep, making them to work too much, not allowing them to eat properly, monitoring their phones, their computer use, who they're with, isolation.
Which, by the way, he regularly stole or took her phone and was looking stuff up. So sorry, but
he did. He took her phone away as punishment. He would punish her. A healthy relationship doesn't have punishment. You might be mad at someone and say, "I'm mad at you," but you don't have the power over them to punish them. And the questioner, your listener, asked about neglecting somebody. So basically acting like their needs don't count. It's another way of treating a person as if they're not human. It could be the silent treatment is another way of shutting somebody out and showing them that they don't count. It's a way of controlling a person. Hey, if you don't do what I want, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm going to pretend that you don't exist. And so these are all ways to manipulate, indirectly manipulate or directly manipulate another person's behavior through power over. Coercive control is an attempt to totally dominate another person. And the way Sean Combs did it, or allegedly did it, is very obvious. But the way it's done in a lot of other relationships is not so obvious.
Dr. Fontes, people are going to laugh when I ask you this, and they're going to think that I'm being silly, but I'm really not. You know, I guess Suge Knight, this was actually brought up last week at the very end of the week, that it's sort of an open secret. They call him Tootsie Roll or Itty Bitty Diddy, and he's got a very apparently insubstantial manhood, I guess, however I would phrase that. Could this be the root of some of his issues, that he feels, this Sean Combs, that he feels inferior, that he feels less than, that he's bringing these other men in there, that he's so angry at the world? I know it sounds like, you know, it's filled with levity. It's not intended to be, but a serious question. Could these be contributing, if true, to the way he is acting out?
I think that that's probably a stretch. I mean, we could speculate all day, but there are plenty of men who have organs of all different sizes, shapes, you know, bends. There's plenty of women who feel insecure about their body parts, and they don't totally try to dominate other people, control other people sexually, beat them, frighten them, pay them tens of thousands of dollars not to talk, to take away their right to talk. So I think that, as much as Freud gave a lot of importance to that, I do not consider that terribly important.
Yeah, I bring it up because apparently he's I didn't know this, but he was widely ridiculed in the hip hop community, I guess, for that. Who even knows if it's true? But what we do know is true is Matthew K gifted 50 memberships to STS Nation, incredibly generous. So thank you. And the COE and the mods will divvy those up and give them out. Just getting back to the testimony, because it's important to do both here. This is Dawn Richard of Danity Kane on the stand, saying again that she saw him punch, choke, slap, kick Cassie. At one point she had a black eye and had to wear sunglasses. So the bandmates also wore kind of these sunglasses as a show of solidarity. She recalls Sean Combs not only delaying Cassie Ventura's career, but actually saying, quote unquote, wait your turn. And then, Berit, we get to a drug dealer whose name is One Stop. I imagine you just have to stop with him to get what you want. And that he regularly delivered drugs to the studio, and that Sean Combs now keeps the drugs in a Louis Vuitton pouch that we heard about last week, known as the med bag, with cocaine, marijuana, MDA. And then we hear about the guns. And when asked what she wants from testifying, Dawn Richard simply says, I'm expecting justice. What I found last week was the government would just put a lot of things out there and kind of jump around. Is that a typical approach like we're seeing here with the wait your turn, the drug dealer named One Stop, the med bag? Is that a typical, I guess, methodology for the government to use in terms of laying out the case, to kind of put all these things out there like throwing spaghetti at the wall? Or should they be more, specific and orderly in the way they present the case?
Yeah, and it's a really good question. And I think it's something that people don't fully understand when most of their trial information comes from TV, right? Mm-hmm. So what I would always say in the beginning of a trial is, especially in a long trial, if they're going to be, 6 or 7 week trial here, this is not a story that we're going to be able to tell linearly. Oftentimes we will call a witness because that's when the witness can come. Sometimes, you might hear people telling part of the story out of order. They maybe wouldn't have even wanted to call Cassie as their first witness, but here she is, very pregnant, and they want to make sure that they can get her in before she has the baby. So, yes, this is absolutely common, particularly in long trials, that evidence comes in. You try to do it in an order that makes sense, but look, you have to get it in when you can get it in. So what this all points to is the importance of the closing arguments. The closing arguments is the time the prosecutors will bring all of this information together, all of the evidence that the jurors have heard, and they're going to make it make sense. they're going to say, okay, remember that very first witness you heard about 7 weeks ago? You may not even remember his testimony, but let's go back over that. And now I get to explain to you how it fits in with these other things. Remember this person, look how well they corroborate this other witness here. So they'll get to pull all those things together in a way that they can't do during the trial. And this is one reason that judges are so adamant, and they repeat it over and over and over again during the course of the trial. Keep an open mind. Don't make your mind up. Keep an open mind till the end, because you don't know everything on day 6 or the beginning of week 2. You just don't. You can't make sense of all the evidence until you've seen the whole picture, until you've heard from all the witnesses. So the prosecutors have a big job when it comes to closing, especially in a trial like this, to put everything together and make it make sense. But I guess the short answer is no, not uncommon.
And Berit, just a quick follow-up. So they say 8 weeks. At one point, the judge told the jurors, oh, well, this should be over by the 4th of July. Is it really going to go that long? I mean, we got to 3 witnesses today. Do you really foresee it going another 6 weeks after this week?
I don't. This will go much faster than they're expecting. And I will say, we're good at many things, but prosecutors are not great always at estimating how long things are going to take. You want to overestimate it for your jurors because you want to make sure they can stay at least that long. But usually most cases, at least the trials that I was a part of, usually finish before. They do seem to be moving at a pretty good clip. And I got to imagine Cassie has to be one of the most significant witnesses they're going to be calling. And if her testimony is already finished in, 3 days, I think it probably will go much more quickly than they were anticipating.
Yeah, I think it was 4 days, not to be,
4 days.
Not to, whatever the word is. I'm losing my mind at this point of the day. But so how short could it be? And I don't mean Diddy. When could this end? Sorry about that.
I mean, hard to know because we don't know what kind of a case, if any, the defense is going to have. They have no burden to put on witnesses, but they certainly have the opportunity. So we don't know who they would call. Probably a few more weeks, but I would be shocked if it is more than 3 more weeks. But again, I'm often shocked at things. So
yeah, well, you never know. And so Anna, to Berit's point here, what about the defense case in chief? Because they have no burden of proof, like Berit just said. Do you expect them to put on a case? And if so, I mean, relative to the government, how long will that case be, do you think?
In terms of the length of the case, that's anybody's guess. We're just as bad at making the predictions as the government is in terms of, how long are witnesses going to take. I mean, for instance, I think one of the reasons why they thought the case was going to take longer was because they expected Cassie's testimony, in particular her cross, to be longer. And the defense did not go as long as I think some people thought that they might. So that, that shortens it. In terms of what the defense case might look like, it's very hard to tell. I mean, I could imagine that they will call some witnesses to say, I was around and Cassie and this other victim all said they loved this. They wanted to participate in it. They liked it. Those kind of witnesses, I could imagine that. I could also imagine an expert witness to try and, counteract their expert in terms of, the abuse and the mental state and things like that. So I could imagine them calling their own expert with respect to that. And then, of course, the wild card is, whether or not Combs will take the opportunity to testify. In my humble opinion, that would be a humongous mistake. But he is ultimately the one that gets to make that decision, and he does not have to make that decision until the very last minute.
Yeah. I can't imagine a scenario with these attorneys, because these are excellent attorneys, that they're going to let him do that. But the guy's a performer and he's a egomaniac, no doubt. So maybe he will want to get up there and make his own case, but I think it's going to backfire. To Dr. Fontes, this is another thing that comes up constantly inside the various overflow galleries. You'll hear people say, who I don't think are necessarily educated on this topic at all, but they'll say, well, she, and the defense was making this point, obviously, last week. They say, well, she did this voluntarily. She went with him. She was even organizing these freak offs. She went to Dwayne Reed to get oil. But doctor, if you can just explain, I guess once you've been under someone's control for a while, now you're doing what is asked of you, I think.
So let's start at the beginning. She was 19, I believe, and he was 38 when they met. Okay. So she was an aspiring young singer. He was an established, wealthy music executive, well known. Her brain wasn't fully formed. We know that people's brains finish forming at 24 or 25. Look at the difference between them. She looks like a young child in that picture, which is what she was. She was about the age that his daughters are now when he took over her life, when he, shortly after, I don't know exactly when, signed a 10-record music contract and effectively owned her and her music. He owned her music, and her career. She testified that she cried when he kissed her for the first time, not because she was happy, but because she was terrified. He was so much older. It wasn't a comfortable thing for her. Those pictures really, really show the difference in age between them. And so he took over her life. He took over her mind. He obligated her to participate in these group sexual torture sessions, which is what I will call them rather than freak-offs. To participate in these group sexual torture sessions full of drugs and filmed them. And then he repeatedly, apparently, allegedly, according to her testimony, showed her these videos again and again. See what I've got on you. If you tell anybody, if you try to leave me, I'm going to make these public and ruin your life. And he had the power to ruin her life, she thought, by showing these videos to other people, by releasing them. So he controlled her in 1,000 ways, whether or not on any given day he said, call a bunch of people and get a freak off going. And she said, yes, sir. And she did. That doesn't mean she was doing it from her free will. If he said, I want you to do this sexually with this person and that with that person and this with the other person right in a row, and she had a urinary tract infection, he said, I don't care, keep going, harder, faster, more, for days on end. That doesn't mean that she was willing. That doesn't mean she wanted to. And even these texts, which the defense was so eager to share with the public, where she said, I love you, or she said, let's do an FO for freak off. We call that pleasing and appeasing. She was not a free woman. She had been subject to his physical violence. She'd been subject to his sexual violence. She'd been subject to his verbal cutting her down. She felt unfree to leave. And she was trying to keep him de-escalated. She said she would have to try to rest between these freak-offs, that she felt like this was now her job, these sexual torture sessions, to do what he wanted. That was really her job. And she complained about that to him. But that's what he had her do. And that's what he had her do for years, starting at a very young age.
And Dr. Fontes, right on cue, because this is yet another thing that comes up consistently and constantly is, well, Sean Diddy Combs had everything. He had celebrity, money, fame, fortune. He didn't have to do any of this. So why is he doing it?
Well, we don't know. I certainly don't know. I mean, I haven't, I would say he's not a happy man. There's very few pictures, if any, of him smiling. I think of him sitting in the corner, pleasing himself while he's directing all these other people sexually in these painful marathon sessions. That's a very sad picture to me. This is not a picture of a untortured person. He's a tortured person, but I'm in no way forgiving him for that. There's a lot of people who have a lot of reason for unhappiness and they don't go around inflicting it on others. So he made choices in this regard. I don't know. It would be interesting to know what happened to him in his childhood. But it's also important to say that the great majority of survivors, male and female, never go on to harm other people. They go on, they help other people, they work in professions where they help other people. And so, whatever may have happened to him in his childhood, I don't know what it was, but it doesn't serve as an excuse, even if it's part of the explanation.
Yeah, apparently.
It'll be interesting. I know that the defense had said that he tried to make the case last week that he was withdrawing from drugs, and that explained some of his bad behavior. But let's be clear, when people withdraw from drugs, they can feel absolutely miserable and be terribly unhappy. But it's a choice to use that unhappiness to actively harm other people. That's always a choice.
Yeah, ultimately it comes down to a choice for sure. Queen Quiche here, it's a sickness about, why this happened. Same thing as serial killers. Dana here, he grew up with a mother who had men in and out of the home. I don't think Janice Combs is a saint. The father definitely was not. I think he was murdered, but also prior to that was involved in criminal activity himself. So maybe he didn't learn the best role models. Just getting back to testimony, from the latter part of the morning, he had the cross-exam by the defense of Dawn Richard of Danity Kane fame, and they immediately start Berit pointing out inconsistencies. And unlike with Cassie, where they were incredibly careful, I believe it was still a woman crossing her. However, the gloves came off a little bit more. And they point to the fact that Dawn previously had only said that she heard him get with Cassie get hit with a frying pan. Now it's that she was actually hit with a frying pan, that she had never previously mentioned guns or ketamine being used. And she admits that she sought to work again with Sean Combs in 2011 and as recently as about 4 or 5 years ago, and then admits that she believes that Combs derailed her career not once but twice. Are these points for the defense in showing? The thing to me that stands out the most is that she went back to try to work with him as recently as 2020. But look, he also controls livelihoods. He makes or breaks you, right? So, are these points for the defense, or is this just noise?
I mean, this is absolutely fair grounds for cross-examination. I think they would be not doing their jobs right if they didn't point to these as part of their cross, right? I mean, look, I will say it is not uncommon for witnesses to have their stories evolve the more they meet with prosecutors. And I say this, I'm not ascribing ill motive to it. This is just how the human brain works, especially when there's things that either happened a long time ago or were somewhat traumatic, or were during a period where maybe you yourself were using narcotics. That's not uncommon to have your story evolve, particularly if you're meeting with prosecutors a number of times, you are refreshing your recollection as you go. Yes, details are going to clarify, things are going to come into more focus, you're going to remember things that maybe you didn't remember the first time. 100% that happens, that's how the human brain works. However, it is also totally fair for the defense to make a lot of hay about that, as they are doing right now. So I think it's definitely fair ground. They're also making a lot with what are her motivations here in testifying and saying, well, you have, this and that, and you want financial. But I think that, again, they have to take their shots where they can. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what I keep coming back to is her testimony. Yes, if this was the only witness the government had, okay, maybe there might be some issues. But her testimony really lines up with everything that we've heard from the other witnesses. And that's what they're going to rely on when they're, trying to sum this up is, okay, yes, were there some inconsistencies between meeting 1 and meeting 8 when she had with the government? Probably, yes. That's not crazy. But is her story largely consistent with what you've heard from other witnesses? Are there documents that support this? Are there videos? Does it make sense with, the vibe of the case? Absolutely. And so that's what they're going to rely on as opposed to, so I think that ultimately, while it's fair for the defense to do this, I don't know that it'll ultimately sway anybody who otherwise would want to convict here.
Yeah, I'm going to get back to Anna in a moment with some more testimony and questions. But a guy like Sean Combs, from what we've heard, Dr. Fontes, do you believe that he could, let's say he gets sent to prison or not? Is there going to be a moment in his life where he goes, wow, I was a real jerk off. I'm a horrible person. I never should have done these things. Or does he just view what he's doing as rational and okay? Can a guy like him see the light or be rehabilitated?
That is another fabulous question.
Thank you. I'm getting lucky tonight.
I would like to believe that for him. I would hope that for him. I have no sympathy for the way he's destroyed other people's lives, and especially Cassandra Ventura's life. I have no sympathy for that. But I would hope that at whatever point, if he has an opportunity to get some kind of help, and it might only be in prison. That might be the only place where he's forced to face himself. And prisons, I'm not saying that they're generally rehabilitative. I don't know, but perhaps he would have an opportunity to examine his life and have some kind of spiritual and psychological awakening. So I would not put him in a garbage can, but he definitely needs to not have the power over people that he has had. And my hope, I would like to see him be redeemed in that way.
Yeah.
But I also really hope that he will never have the power to do that over other people. And I hope that we will become smarter as a culture and catch these things before they've gone on for 10 years and 12 years. I mean, we know that Combs isn't the only person. We've had Weinstein and Epstein and R. Kelly and many, many more, a lot of whom are not famous, who've engaged in these kinds of behaviors over time. We've seen teachers and scout troop leaders and politicians, all kinds of really reprehensible behavior. So I hope we'll stop accepting that and seeing it as business as usual.
And it's interesting because it doesn't discriminate in terms of the perpetrators. Like right now, we are covering the Alexander brothers, who come from a totally different world than Sean Combs, but they are accused.
They're mostly men. Let's be real.
Well, yeah. No, that is for sure. Yes. By the way, like what percentage of coercive controllers are actually not men? Do we know?
Well, in same-sex relationships, there are women who control other women, and there are occasionally women who exert coercive control over men. Typically, they don't have enough power to do that, and also they don't typically have the ability to physically and sexually threaten their partners. But it certainly does exist. It's less common. It's much less common in heterosexual couples.
Shout out to Evan Duke for gifting 5 memberships. I appreciate that. And Graciela, who comes to us from Australia. Combs is going to learn how to control the prison as much as he can get. I tend to agree with this. If he ends up in prison, I think it's just going to heighten his criminal inclinations. But Anna, to you, one of the other things that's hard not to notice when you're in the gallery, the overflow rooms, is there are a decent number of members of the public who just come to watch, and a good amount of these people are fans. They're literally they're not supposed to, but they're literally yelling at the monitor saying, free Diddy, she deserved it, she was in on it. You only need one juror, right, Anna? And if there's a fan in there who likes Diddy and his music, could that be a big problem for the government potentially?
I mean, listen, juries are completely unpredictable. We go through jury selection, and jury selection is a misnomer. We do not get to select the jurors. What we get to do is deselect. We get to try and find jurors that we think are going to be really bad for our side and hope that the ones that are left are going to be fair and impartial. But absolutely, they have, we call them usually stealth jurors, right? A juror who gets on, whose intention is just to get on that jury, just to get on that particular case, and to want to sort of have made their mind up, right? To have the decision go one way or another. In this case, obviously, if it was someone in his favor, that creates a hung jury, and that's an issue. On the other hand, for the government, in a case like this, they might say, we're willing to try it again. Of course, they may end up having witnesses that aren't available. We know that, Cassie is about to have a baby and that they're not going to, bring her right back in or after having gone through this. They may reconsider calling some of the witnesses, of course, because of the trauma that this puts them through. But at the end of the day, I'm giving you a long explanation for what you asked for. Yeah. Jurors can do all sorts of things, and we cannot predict it as much as we want to. We just can't.
Yeah. We're going to go a few more minutes, and then I've got to let the panel be on their way, but a couple more things, and I want to get through some more of this testimony if they'll bear with me. So basically on redirect at the end, Dawn Richard is asked, what did you want from this civil suit? She filed suit back in September, and she says, I wanted to be made whole, meaning I guess financially and emotionally. So they put it out there on the record that, yeah, she was same with Cassie, who got a $20 million settlement. I personally don't have a problem with that. I mean, I'm talking as literally myself, but who knows if the jurors do. Just before noon, Kerry Morgan, who was a one-time best friend of Cassie Ventura, takes the stand, and she said she was only testifying because she was subpoenaed and was essentially forced into it, and said, I quote unquote, moved on with my life. And then she goes on to describe two different violent incidents, one in Jamaica and one in the Hollywood Hills. In Jamaica, she is dragged, she watches Cassie being dragged by her hair and thrown onto brick pavement. They are so scared that she and Kerry Morgan, Cassie and Kerry Morgan, take off in a golf cart. It's amazing that she's alive after being hit on the head by the pavement, or landing on the pavement, and they hide in a ditch. Berit, this is heavy testimony. This is the worst of the worst, getting your head slammed into pavement, and now you're literally hiding off a bunker, off a golf course. And she's describing how Sean Combs is driving around. I would imagine, obviously it's horrible for the victims here, but this is exactly what the government needs in order to hammer home their point.
Yeah, again, they are just building with each of these witnesses. They are building their case brick by brick. Even more proof for the sex trafficking statute, on the, coercive, violent. Like, this goes to, anyone who's like, well, maybe it was just totally consensual. You listen to this testimony and, how can you even make that argument with a straight face after hearing testimony like this? So another witness that, even if you don't want to believe Cassie, you have, this person who really corroborates and backs it up. So I think this is a really important witness for the government.
100%. And then Dr. Fontes, she's asked to discuss the incident in the Hollywood Hills. The one we just heard was Jamaica. And again, when you look at the bottom right here, Kerry Morgan, who was also a model, look how they look like, they look like kids, if I'm going to be honest.
Sure do.
They look super young. In the Hollywood Hills, she says, Kerry Morgan, the best friend, says that she saw Sean Combs either hit or kick Cassie Ventura. And then the bodyguard, the security guard, a guy named Ruben, who I believe might be testifying, he refuses to intervene at this point, according to Kerry Morgan. And then they're forced again to hide at a neighbor's house, and they can hear Sean Combs, just like with the golf cart. Now he's driving around the house in a car. And later we learn, just about 20 minutes after this, that Kerry Morgan herself was personally struck and hit by Sean Combs with a wooden hanger behind her right ear. She suffers a concussion. She vomits. She has to go to urgent care. And what happens after this? Sean Combs pays her $30,000 and makes her sign an NDA, which is, to me, laughable. But again, an NDA, look, I was forced to sign an NDA when I left Fox News, which really angered me for a variety of reasons. That's a whole other show, and I should hire Berit or Anna for that, but that's a whole other show. That's just my...
Wait, can I just point out, though, if an NDA, if it's being used to cover up illegal conduct, an NDA is not enforceable. So if you can't make somebody sign an NDA and then be like, oh, you can't testify about it now because it was an NDA. If this was a crime or criminal conduct, the NDA has no impact.
No, good.
However, if you're young like they are, like she was when she probably signed that, I don't know exactly how old she was, she probably doesn't know what it's about. He's very powerful. He's exceedingly violent. She's had to flee from him twice. She was knocked on, she had a concussion by him. He says, sign here and keep your mouth shut. She's going to probably keep her mouth shut.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, 100%. But Dr. Fontes, I just wanted to add to this a little bit and get your take. So Cassie said that she explains to, and by the way, after the incident where he hits the best friend, Kerry Morgan, with this hanger, that's when the relationship ends, because Cassie Ventura takes Sean Combs' side ultimately. And she's like, I draw the line at physical abuse. And that's when their friendship ends, which is sad in and of itself. But Cassie says, according to Kerry Morgan, the ex-best friend, that she could not leave Sean Combs because her job, her car, her apartment, all of it was tied to him. He was helping her financially. So the obvious question, I assume that's another method of control, is when you've got the money to control them financially as well, Dr. Fontes.
Absolutely. So that was financial control. It was control over her career, because not only had he signed this multi-record deal, which I guess he only produced one of her records, but led her on to think that more were going to happen. But he also could destroy her reputation in the field if he released these videos. And so he had control over many aspects of her life, which she testified. And we heard last week from Daniel Phillip, who, one of the male prostitutes or sex workers, who said that he was terrified of Mr. Combs, that he was all powerful. So he gave this impression of being omnipotent. And one of the things that really strikes me when I hear you talk, Joel, about his various assaults on Ms. Ventura is the absolute brutality. You know, hitting the friend on the head with a wooden stick, you know, knocking Cassie onto a brick floor, stomping on her face. We heard that in a couple of different assaults. He knows that she's a model. Her face is what's going to earn her a living, and he stomps on her face. She had at least one surgery because of that. And so he is seen as being all powerful because he acts all powerful, and he also doesn't seem to have any respect for the others as human beings. It's really sad. I mean, my heart really breaks seeing those pictures of the two of them so young, and the fact that she lost her best friend because of her abuser. That's a very common thing that happens, but it's also very sad. It just intensifies her isolation. And then because she's so isolated, who's she going to turn to? She's going to turn to Mr. Combs. She's going to turn to him. Even though he's causing her all this pain, he's also the only person she's really talking to on a regular basis. So the whole thing is really very, very tragic and isolating.
Yeah, I mean, this case, no matter which way you cut it, is horrific and tragic in many different ways. At 2:00, Kerry Morgan is being crossed. The best friend is, and she talks about Cassie and Cassie's jealousy of Kim Porter, the longtime girlfriend of Sean Combs. Says that she was in fact jealous. Also, she points out that Cassie was, here's another example, she was not allowed to go to New Year's Eve parties. Like, she's a 5-year-old. She was forbidden from going to New Year's Eve parties. Then conversely, Kerry Morgan talks about how Sean Combs was incredibly jealous of Michael B. Jordan, the famous movie actor, not to be confused with Michael Jordan, the basketball player. And she talks about how the two of them, Cassie Ventura and Michael Jordan, were hanging out while filming in South Africa. And then tells the whole story about how she doesn't support or couldn't support Cassie any longer after she herself was beaten. And then finally, we get to a guy named David James taking the stand. He worked for Sean Combs from 2007 to 2009. He was like the executive assistant, and recalls a female executive who told him, and I quote, this is now the assistant being told by a female executive at Bad Boys, "This is Mr. Combs' kingdom, and we are all here to serve in it." So there you go. The head of security, a guy named Uncle Paulie, he carried both a gun and a switchblade. Security members told this guy to stay in your lane. So, you know, the kind of the coercive and controlling behavior extended beyond Cassie to the employees as well. Just one other thing that I'm sort of curious about. Berit, take us inside baseball, because you were actually, obviously involved in many cases in your role as an assistant U.S. attorney. What's going on behind the scenes with some important witnesses who maybe didn't want to testify? I mean, the federal government will lean on them. I saw you, COE. I'm on it. The federal government leans on these people. They can charge you with a lot of things. So are some of these witnesses we're going to hear from basically testifying, I don't want to say against their will, but realizing that there are repercussions legally if they don't come forward and provide relevant information, which I guess is the best way I could put it.
Yeah, I'd sort of put them into two categories. I mean, there are definitely witnesses that the prosecutors have had to subpoena. That's not always because they are completely opposed to coming in or that they refuse to do so. Sometimes it's actually for the witness's own, safety, security. It allows them to do exactly what we heard the witness do on the stand today, which is to say, look, I don't want to be here. I didn't have a choice. This is not something that I was pining to do. They gave me a subpoena. So sometimes we would give subpoenas to people really just for their own good. It wasn't that they were refusing to come, but this was, almost a security measure for them. And then there are witnesses that just downright refuse to come. And there are, different measures that the government can take to get them on the stand. We had witnesses we had to issue what are called material witness warrants for to get them to come in. Those are really extreme measures. You don't want to do that if you can avoid it, for the very obvious tactical reason that having a really grumpy, pissed off witness on the stand, not always the best for you as the person who's calling that witness. Sometimes it can't be avoided though. And sometimes there's just, so much other evidence that you have, such as, documents or videos, that it maybe doesn't matter if they're grumpy or pissed off, that you can, you have enough supporting things to get them on there. I certainly put many hostile witnesses on in my day. Sometimes they were effective. Sometimes they were pretty good at stonewalling. But I think behind the scenes, to your question, what are they doing right now? They're really making sure that they've satisfied all of the elements. Some of them we've already talked about, some of the big picture ones. Some of them are little, right? Like they're little to us, but they're really important for the statute. You have to show that things traveled through interstate commerce, things like that they've definitely satisfied, but you just need to make sure that you've, hit all your marks with each of those. So they're probably just making sure they're satisfying all the elements. And then in closing, they're going to, as I said before, bring them all together.
An amazing panel run by three very smart women. Anna Cominsky, she is the director of the Criminal Defense Clinic at New York Law, teaching other classes. She also serves as in-house counsel. Anna, to you, just to round out this testimony with David James, the former assistant to Sean Combs. He recalls a time in Miami when he's speaking to Cassie Ventura. And again, she says to him, meaning Sean Combs, he controls my career, he pays my allowance, and he pays my rent. At this point, David James himself breaks down crying, recalling this and recalling one moment in particular. This is heartbreaking because it's so simple. She was allowed to, one time in his recollection, she was allowed to pick her own music playlist. And she was so happy that when he's recalling this story, David James breaks down. And he says that he hears Sean Combs referring to Cassie as, quote, moldable and his queen. Your final thoughts on the power of this testimony here from David James, the former assistant to Sean Combs.
I mean, I agree with what everyone said this evening in terms of, this is, when it comes down to it, this case is just really sad. It's very sad. And each of these witnesses that the government is calling, as much as the defense is trying to break down certain pieces, attack credibility of witnesses, unlike a lot of cases that we see where it's a he said, she said, this is a he said versus she said, she said, she said, he said. I mean, multiple witnesses. So, the defense has got a major uphill battle here. And I don't see it getting any easier for them over this next few weeks.
Yeah, Anna, real quick, this witness, and I know you have to go in just about 5 minutes and we'll be done by then, I promise. But this witness that went missing, can they be compelled? Also, You know, I don't want to be an alarmist, but in a case like this, don't they have to make sure, and I'm sure they have already done this, but don't they have to check on this person, make sure that they're okay, that they're not being held beyond, beyond their will, etc.?
So we think of this in a couple different ways. Like missing to the public may mean just like they're not coming outside their house. They went over to their grandmother's house and they're not letting anybody know that they're there. Missing in terms of a witness who's supposed to come to court is very different, right? So has this person been subpoenaed and they can't be found? Will the court have to grapple with whether or not there should be a missing witness instruction? And then, yes, absolutely. I mean, the truth of it is if this is a witness for the government and the government thinks there's any kind of foul play, absolutely, they're going to be looking for this person and making sure that they're okay.
Yeah, you see here the Washington Post reporting tomorrow. You're going to hear from another male escort, a former personal chef for Sean Combs, and Regina Ventura, who is Cassie's mother, who I have to say sounds like she was actually very protective over her daughter. She was taking photos. She was urging her daughter oftentimes to call the police. And I know some people said, well, why didn't the mom or the family step in and do more? But it sounds like she was trying to do what she could. Lisa Aronson Fontes, she serves as an expert witness in legal cases related to intimate partner abuse, as well as coercive control, trauma, child abuse, and cultural issues. And she literally wrote the second ever book on coercive control. And we are lucky to have her here. Dr. Fontes, to you, obviously this last bit of testimony where this guy, David James, hears Combs referring to Cassie as moldable and as queen, it's almost like he is looking for the right victim. Is there anything to this? Are these coercive controllers looking for the right kind of personalities? I can tell you someone like my wife would, I mean, I don't want to say never, but she'd probably kick you in the face before you'd ever be able to do anything to try to control her. And I mean that with a lot of love. So are they looking for a victim type?
Okay, I want to respond in two ways to that. First of all, my understanding is that David James said that Kim Porter was his queen, but that Cassie was young and moldable, and he's got her where he wants her.
Okay, maybe I misread.
So he was distinguishing between the two of the many women in his life there. But let me just absolutely dispel that myth that it's a certain kind of woman who can be coercively controlled or domestically abused. Your wife, any of us who happen to cross paths with somebody who's very good at what they do at a moment in our lives when we happen to be vulnerable, any of us could become a victim of domestic violence or coercive control. And it's not a reflection on the person who's been victimized. And Cassie Ventura, I hope she goes out and her marriage is a very, very happy one and a healthy one from now on. It's not a reflection of something wrong with the person who's being victimized. It's the victimizer, and they happen to cross paths at a time when the victim wasn't vulnerable.
Well said. And I wholeheartedly believe what you are telling me here. Just another amazing panel. Kim Porter, Brianna, our friend in the chat, pointing out she was only 47. She died of pneumonia. Some people question that. You can't question Berit Berger. Okay. You cannot question her aptitude as an attorney, former federal prosecutor in this very district from 2007 to 2018. This, I got to tell you, and maybe I am whining right now. Last week was unbelievably exhausting just to watch this. So, I mean, it's got to be just incredibly wearing to try a case like this. The defense was talking about being up till 3:30 in the morning. Just quickly tell us what the government is doing after court ends every day and your final thoughts here. And by the way, I have to put you on the spot. Will you come back on to discuss this and other cases?
Absolutely. Would be happy to. I'll tell you what the government's doing. I mean, there is no rest in a long trial like this, which is why you have multiple prosecutors. They are hopefully, going through the next day's witnesses, making sure that they're, have their ducks in a row. But it is exhausting. I mean, the longest trial I did was around 6 or 7 weeks. And by the end of it, I was a shell of myself. So they are hopefully providing a lot of support to each other. And, you go prep this witness while I'm in court doing this. But, remember, they have lives and practically, other cases on their load too. So, nothing stops just because you're on trial. So it's very difficult. But I will say the one thing is, in a case like this, they have been preparing for this for, a long time. They have agents that are, their law enforcement partners that are so valuable, that get everything ready, make sure the witnesses are there. So they really make the trains run on time. But it's a huge job.
Yeah. And I got to ask you, I got to put you on the spot again. Will the government get a conviction here?
I mean, again, I'm going to do my knocking, although that's going to make my dog bark. Yeah, they'll get a conviction. I mean, honestly, and I can just say, see, I made her bark. If nothing else, they have this interstate prostitution charge that they charged. That is kind of I call it the giveaway. Like, they've already proved that charge. That one doesn't have
what kind of time does that carry? That charge?
Yeah, that one does not carry the same life as the maximum. But that would certainly put him in jail for, a number of years. So that would have a maximum of 10 years, where these other ones would have a maximum of life. I have almost no doubt in my mind that he will be convicted of something and he will get jail time. So.
There you go. Love you all. Appreciate you being here. We're going to do it again. I'm doing updates every day at lunch and then likely after court. Don't forget, in case you're feeling comfortable, there are 7 of 10 jailbirds who are still on the run from New Orleans. We covered that over the weekend. We'll pick that story back up. Shout out to Professor Anna Cominsky, Dr. Lisa Fontes, an expert in coercive control, and Berit Berger, who is a former assistant U.S. attorney in New York. Love you, America. We'll see you tomorrow, roughly 12:45 p.m. with a Diddy summary. See you then. Guys, stick around 1 second.